Hello, friends. This is your friend Kentsi Dodds, and I'm excited to be joined again by my friend Titus. Say hi, Titus.
Hi, Titus.
Yes. Very good. All right. So, if you didn't already listen to the first episode that I had with Titus, we talked about open source and ASTs, and it was really interesting and fun. Definitely listen to that because that's where you get to know Titus a little bit. We're going to jump right into it and talk about native ESM, that stands for ECMAScript Modules. So, import, export. This may be the only way that you've ever written JavaScript before, but you may not realize that you're probably compiling those away to either CommonJS and Node or Webpack module system or whatever. But ESM is here. It's super here, and we want to figure out how to make this, how to make our code run with native ES modules. So anyway, Titus, can you give us a little intro to like the module space? Like, why do we have different module formats and stuff like that?
Yeah. So we're both not experts here, but on ESM. So they're much more qualified people, but we both are users of this a lot. And I as a maintainer, and you also as a maintainer, and also as an educator. And we're noticing that it's time to really start using ESM. Yeah. So, okay, the module space. Well, I guess in the beginning we had script tags, right? And you added a script tag to your HTML, and probably not everybody like is from this time, but some people will remember. um, and you just added more scripts, and if you wanted to load jQuery and some jQuery plugins, and then you had them all in the window namespace. You had those as variables. um, that worked pretty well, but it's kind of unmaintainable. It's a lot of code, and you need to, and a lot of scripts, and you need to minify all that. And so there wasn't like a real um, module format. And then came require JS, which is different than the require that you know from Node. Um, and that was, yeah, so it was an async function that you could give it a path to a file. It loaded that file async, and then you got that module as a in your callback. Then at the start of Node, I'm not sure if it was at in the first release of Node, CommonJS, but CommonJS isn't a Node only thing. There used to be alternatives to Node before, and I guess maybe they still exist. And Deno is now also, I guess, an alternative to Node. Um, and but what really made Node popular is this great module format called CommonJS. And NPM as well, because it was so easy to reuse code, and you used to have like snippet folders, but now you have like you can just import it from npm, much better. um but that didn't work in browsers. So if you wanted to use that code on the front end, you needed to compile these things away, because it wasn't actually JavaScript, it was something in Node. um well, and that's okay. So we're now at like 2015, I guess. And then the spec came with, okay, we're going to do modules, and we're going to import and export things. And that's ESM. So the plan for that was made in 2015. And well, now it's 6 years later, and it's been spec'd, and it works in most places. And especially on April 30, the last node will be end of life on that date, and that means that 12 and 14, and I guess 16 is coming out around that time as well. So all those Node versions will support ESM out of the box. Um, so we're finally here. We're finally at this beautiful moment where ESM works, and you don't need to compile it away. You can, of course, often it's useful to minify your code, but you don't have to. Yeah, that's the background, I guess.
It's here. Yeah, it totally. I remember early on when Babel supported ESM, and it like at the very start, I think it was Babel 5 maybe, that I started with 65 actually.
Yeah.
Um, and I was compiling and I was happy, and I ran in when I upgraded to Babel 6, I think they made a big change with the way that they compiled ESM, and the way that I'd been using it was like totally wrong, and all of my stuff was busted. And I'd been teaching people how to use ESM, and I'd been teaching it wrong, and I just was like, oh no, shoot! And so I wrote this blog post. I'll put it in the links, but um, it was an interop between CommonJS and ESM issue there. And yeah, so like it's been a long and kind of interesting road. But now we have like an official way that CommonJS interplays with ESM and vice versa, like how you get ESM modules into CommonJS modules and how you import CommonJS modules into ESM modules and stuff like that. It's all well defined. The seriously, like it has taken a really long time, as you described, but I think that the Node project has just done a phenomenal job of being very thoughtful about how they make this work without totally breaking the community and having
Yeah.
like a Python 2, Python 3 situation where
Yeah.
you've just got two completely separate communities. Like, does this work in Python 3 yet? So yeah, so this is a good and exciting time. So um, what do you what do you think are the biggest benefits to using ESM? Why couldn't we have just stayed with CommonJS in Node?
Yeah, there definitely are some benefits, but I would have been fine using CommonJS, I think. It worked well. We as a community used one format and we compiled our things, and yeah, that was just really easy. Of course, like it's a 6 year old format or more, CommonJS, and now we have a more modern format. So there are some new niceties in that new format. But indeed, we are now at this crossroads where we have these two things, and how they interrupt is complex. Um, Tree shaking is something that's mentioned a lot as a benefit of ESM, although it's not completely true.
Yeah.
You can do some tree shaking on CommonJS as well, and you can't perfectly do tree shaking on ESM either. So it's a bit more nuanced. Just the fact that it's all async, that's really, I think, nice. And that's what I noticed because for folks, last episode I mentioned that I have a lot of projects. And I think for 30 days now, I've started rewriting projects in ESM. And so I think I'm like 100 projects in. Um, and
Wow.
it just feels nice, the format and with the tooling, and not having to compile for it to run in the browser. And yeah, it's just, I think it's something that folks need to try out and notice.
Yeah, yeah, 100 projects is a lot. But that's one thing that you mentioned that is interesting to me is that um, ESM is async. And I think let's get a little bit more clarity on that. So when I have an import statement at the top of my file, I don't have to write async code to access that. What you're talking about is loading those modules for like people who are handling the loading of those modules. That part is async. So
Yeah.
and you can dive into this a little deeper, but when we're talking about CommonJS, when you require a file, you can actually kind of slip in between um, that require statement and actually getting the module with some Node APIs. But that code that you write for that, which most people don't write that, but if you're doing something like that, that code has to be synchronous. But what you're saying is with ESM, that code can be async. Is that right?
Yes. Um, and that's really a great benefit for well, one example is like in Node, you read files from the file system, but on Node, in Node you're on a server, so that's pretty fast and that's fine. But in a browser, like you can read from that server really fast, right? So that's a whole network request, um, and that takes some time. So having that be async is really beneficial there. Node doesn't yet allow that import. And that goes over HTTP, right? Not a file path or something. It's an HTTP import. Node doesn't have those yet, but they can be added through this mechanism that you just explained. So that also Node could request stuff from it with HTTP URLs. And well, last episode we talked about MDX, so it's also possible to import MDX files in Node and have them be compiled, or yeah, a lot of stuff like this. React Server Components also kind of works like this, so it prevents you from including your server code on the client by throwing an error. Yeah,
Yeah, so it just this is like it's called the loader API, right? Where you can add special loaders to Node to say, hey, if you're importing a .mdx file or even like a .png file or whatever,
right. Yeah,
yeah, you can insert some code to say, here's how you want to handle it. It's almost kind of I think more people would be familiar with a Webpack loader or a rollup plugin or something, right?
yeah, yeah. And this is a super experimental API in Node that's about to change. So this definitely hasn't crystallized yet. But the fact that this is all possible with ESM, and there are like a couple of other things going on in the Node project that are super exciting, that are made possible by ESM. Yeah, that's super cool, but also very new.
Yeah. Exciting new things made possible by the async nature of loading these. Now, for us regular people who are just writing the imports and stuff, we don't have to care about that. That all kind of is like implementation details of Node and how it resolves modules. Can you touch on some of the, especially since you've been migrating things over, what are some of the biggest differences that you've noticed? Like, I'll just mention one, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Is like one thing that I've noticed is I can't import a module and rely on the package JSON like main to have it resolve to the main file, or even rely on the .index of a directory. I think there's like some extra configuration or flags or something you can use. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So in browsers, ESM is the only thing, right? But on Node, with the package.json, there you need to switch either am I in CommonJS or am I in ESM? And you do that by default, you're in CommonJS. And if you add a type property to your package.json and you set it to the string module, then it becomes a module. There's an alternative way to switch between these things, and that's if you name your files with a .mjs, then it's always a module, and if you call it .cjs, then it's always CommonJS. So that's how you can mix these.
And to be clear, that's when if you say type module for a package JSON, that means every file that's a sibling of that package JSON, as well as any file in directories below it, are all going to be assumed to be a type module unless they end a .cjs, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but you can also like gradually move to ESM by having your normal CommonJS project and then starting to name some stuff .mjs.
Yeah, cool.
Um, and then there are some differences indeed. So um, well, in Node, it was you were able to import like a directory, and then it'll look for or you would be able to import something, require something, and then it'll try a bunch of places. So okay, is it a directory? Then I'll try index.js, and then I'll try index.json. All these things, very magical. And that's nice. It's a pretty nice experience. But on the other hand, being super explicit is also a nice experience because it's not ambiguous where things are coming from. So by default, ESM it wants to be explicit. So you need to name your files or use the imports of like those complete paths. But there is a way also to do interop between both ESM and CJS. There is a way where you can now mark things, files in your package, in your project as private. And you can define which of those you expose through an exports property with an object in your package.json. And there are a lot of possibilities. So one of the things I mentioned earlier that Node is adding, which is pretty cool, is conditions. So you can set, for example, development or production as a condition. And based on that, it could import certain files, like either this one or that one. Um, Server components, React Server components is another example that is using a condition. So is this running on the server or is this as a client? And this is all possible with export maps.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I have looked at that just a little bit. And one thing that I do in lots of my projects is I'll have a couple of like slash import things. So like you can import React or testing library React slash pure to skip all of the like after each that we add and stuff like that. Um, or in MDX bundler, I have a slash client that you can import for the client side of this stuff. And to make that work, I have to have a file that I put at the root of my project that re-exports what I bundle or what I my build output in the dist directory, which I've always hated doing, but it works, and so I just keep doing it that way.
Yeah.
But with the package JSON exports, oh, and the other problem with this is just like people can import directly from the dist directory. They can just grab whatever file they want,
Yeah,
and then
even
they
your
can get
private APIs that you like
yeah.
kind of want to change because they're like pretty new and it was only private. So like, yeah,
Yeah.
and they could have used that, and then now you change it and it's breaking everything. And yeah,
Yeah, precisely. And like if they need it, then they can ask me and I can like maybe solidify that and then take that into consideration when we make breaking changes and stuff. But yeah, so having this exports just changes all of that, and doing conditional exports is also very interesting for React. I know their main export is just a single file. It's like 4 lines that says if process node env or process env node env is production, then module exports require this file, otherwise this other one for their production development mode. So it seems like the Node team knows what the community is doing and is making official APIs and configuration for enabling those sorts of use cases.
yeah, yeah, they're working like really hard and they're doing awesome stuff.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, we've got once you say type module, everything in there is a module unless it ends in .cjs. You can add the exports, so you can specify which files people can import. If you don't add the exports, then you just like you won't be able to say package slash name of export. You say package slash name of file,
Yeah.
right? That's how that works? And so you could just continue doing what you've always been doing, but there is a module property, right? So what is and maybe is that a Webpack only thing, or is that like
Yeah,
a
that's non-standard. That's like
yeah?
a thing that, well, probably not only Webpack, but probably Rollup as well. So that's, I guess, well, what we had the last years when ESM wasn't ready. It's where you could publish both ESM and or fake ESM and CommonJS, and then folks, your users would either get the module one if they were using Webpack setup to do that, or they were getting the CJS. But that's not like a Node or NPM thing. That's like a custom Webpack thing.
Got it. Yeah. So for Node specifically, you're going to say type is module, and then if you want to make it so people don't have to go directly to the files that they're importing and list out the whole file name, then you have exports. Now there is a way for me to say when somebody's doing just import my module or import this directory, this is the file that they get, right? Is that part of the exports?
Um, yes, I do have a lot of projects that only have one index.js file, so I'm not too sure about I whether directory imports work. I haven't checked that out. I think,
Hmm.
yeah, no, I don't know. I think you need
Yeah,
to
there's
have like the full path in your import, so lib index.js or whatever. But like
yeah,
we
yeah.
had, we have ESM, right? And you can export many more things from that ESM, and you don't need to worry about bundle size because the tree shaking is supposed to be better. So you can instead of having like a client and a server entry point, you could also have that in one file, and then folks either import server from your thing or client from your thing, or indeed with an
Hmm.
export map.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I'll just say I have tried some of that where combining server and client files in a single directory, and that mostly works. The biggest problem with that is if Webpack or ESBuild or Rollup has been configured for client only, then they do have to go through all of the imports, even if so
Okay.
let's say I've got a file that's doing some server and client stuff, and I have an import that's only necessary for the server stuff. It will resolve that import and all of its dependencies before the tree shaking actually happens. And
Right.
I don't know if that's a limitation, and maybe that's a feature that could be added where it
Yeah.
says, "Oh, let me check to see what's going to be tree shaken first, and then I'll remove all that stuff,
Yeah.
and then I'll resolve what's left." That would be really nice. If anybody listening wants to work on that, that literally impacted me like last week. So I'd love to get that to not be a problem. I know that the Remix project is working on sidestepping that by using a special file name convention where you have a dot client or a dot
Right.
server where you can say, hey, this import for this file, if it ends in dot server or if it ends in dot client, it's only needed for that. And so you can get rid of it ahead of time. So that
Right.
seems more like a workaround, but we'll see where that lands too.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so if I wanted to start using native ESM today, what are some of the big issues I'm going to come across, and how do I avoid those problems?
Yeah. Interesting. I think one thing we haven't discussed yet is that it's really hard to use an ESM project, or it's kind of hard to use an ESM project that's only ESM in your CommonJS. But
Mm,
the inverse is much easier. So say you have a dependency that updates to ESM and you try to use it in your code, it's gonna break. It's not gonna work. Um, but on the other hand, if you upgrade your project to ESM, it can use all your CommonJS or ESM dependencies perfectly. Like that works well. Um, yeah, so that's also like, of course, it takes a lot of time or some time to migrate your project to ESM, and especially right now, like this ecosystem is super in flux and stuff is changing, and some tools don't support it yet. But say that's stabilizing in 1 or 2 months, then I think it would definitely be a good time to switch. And if some of your dependency like never updated, that's fine because it's like leftpad or something. It's a super stable a module that never changes. If it's CommonJS, it'll work fine in your ESM. Um,
mm.
what are the problems? I guess your question was. What are people gonna run into? Um, yeah, so the ecosystem. Electron currently crashes on an import. Um, so you can't use ESM there. I think they're also gonna switch around April 30. I know Jest is also having some difficulties. Well, you also know that Jest is having some
Yeah.
difficulties. Care to elaborate more about your experience?
Yeah, yeah. So for me, it's Jest has experimental support. One thing that's not supported at all yet is jest.mock. So if you use any mocking, which makes sense because the way that Jest mocking works right now is they have a Babel plugin that will insert their special mocking code at the top of the module before your require statements, because your imports are turned to require. And so they can hook into the module system before anything's resolved, but because now we're using native ESM, they can't do that. They can't make any of your code execute before the imports happen,
I think
because
this is,
all
by the way, possible with those new node loaders that we just talked
yeah,
about.
and
There is some
that's what they're
preload
working on.
code that I think. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So they're working on that now. Um, but the real problem comes in when you try to combine Jest with native ESM and TypeScript. And that right now the biggest problem there is the way that you integrate a CommonJS module with a ESM module is by doing a dynamic import. So if I'm trying to import a ESM module like XDM, for example, that's the example. um, then I do a dynamic import, and that's fine because the function that I'm using it in is async anyway. So I just async await this XDM package, and I get all the exports out of it. But the problem is that if I'm using TypeScript, then I'm going to compile that down to a require statement, which does not work. So you cannot require a native ESM. And so then you can say, okay, well, TypeScript, I don't want you to compile any imports or exports. But then Node is, and then you say, okay, just let's use native ESM, like let's use these flags that you need to use native ESM. But then Node is not happy because you're using ESM in a file that ends in .ts. So, and you can't do that. You can only use .js
Right, because
or
you're in a CommonJS project, right? And you want to use an ESM project, and
Yes, yes.
Node
And
is not like
so I guess at the end of all of this, I'd say the easiest path forward is to convert your project to ESM first, and then you'll be able to make it work a lot better. I'm still working through the best approach to solving this problem, and whether TypeScript is going to work nicely if I use the right combination of configurations and things. But yes, this is I really believe that the best way forward is a clean break and just say, okay, we're native ESM and let's figure this out now, rather than just trying to make it work for both. Let's just say, nope. If you want to use the old version that was CGS, that's fine, but we're only ESM now, which I think is what you've been doing for lots of your projects.
I'm making the clean break. Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking. We had a couple of Twitter conversations about this publicly. Also, I've had a couple of issues, and some people are really angry that things are changing, and I guess that's always the case, right? But
Yes.
like, it was working perfectly. Why change everything? And that's valid. Um, And then there are also people that are super hopeful that we'll get like a new boom of cool tools and not having to deal with all the legacy that we used to have, but like indeed that clean break. Um, so a lot of emotions, I guess, and a lot of feelings, and it's gonna be an interesting time.
Yeah, I'm confident that things are going to be better with native ESM. Things will hopefully work better with the browser, and yeah, just in general, I think that ESM is a better path forward.
Yeah.
And the whether you're happy or not about ESM versus CGS, and you're like CGS was fine or whatever. Um, whether you're happy with that or not is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. I don't care if you're happy with. The fact is that we've got them, and what's the best path forward? And I think the best path forward is just let's do a clean break, move forward with what we have, and make the most of this. So we've actually got quite a few links here in the show notes. There's one for a blog post by Sindre Soros about it's titled "Get Ready for ESM," and this was actually my first realization that ESM is like coming, and package authors are going to start only supporting ESM.
Yeah.
And this is what you've been doing. Can you kind of talk about a little bit more on why you and other package authors are
Why
deciding to do
only
this
do
clean
one
break?
and not both? Yeah. Um, because well, it depends, but we maintain, Sindre and me maintain lots of projects, and it's just a lot to maintain different module systems. And like my early packages used to be Node, but also Bower.js and also Component.js. So we had like not just one package.json, but we had like three of them, and we had like browser bundles in them, and it's just a lot to maintain. Plus, the interop doesn't work perfectly. So there are cases where, so you have a module, right? And it supports both ESM or CommonJS, but then but those two are used by two different projects, and those two are used in your project. And one is using the ESM, one is using the CommonJS version. It's getting two. It's just two copies, which is a lot of weight,
Mm,
right? But it's also those objects are the same, not the same. So you
and
have
not
like an
shared.
array in one and an array in a different one, and they're different classes. So there are like these deadlock problems that are
Yeah,
possible
I
here.
hadn't thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense.
And there's also, because we had so long of this faux ESM that Babel and Webpack allowed, which is also really useful, but it also means that there were some bugs in them that work differently in Node and in browsers. So they had one version and now they're a different one. Um, so I also tried publishing one that had dual support, but then a bunch of people are using Create React app, which is using Webpack 4, which, so this broke everyone. Um, yeah, so I don't have the best experience there, and I also don't want to maintain complex build steps, etc. I just want to write JavaScript and help developers develop, and yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good call there. I didn't even realize some of those issues. So this is why I typically try to trust people who have experience with stuff, because they normally have a good reason to back up their opinions and decisions. Cool. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring up about ESM, native ESM, that before we wrap this up and give people their homework?
It's gonna be really cool. It's gonna be a bright, new, brave, awesome, cool world. ESM only. Yeah, ready for it.
I'm ready too. Very cool. All right, so our call to action. I've actually written a blog post titled "Super Simple Start to ES Modules in the Browser." This is actually written already, but I'm also going to write another blog post called "Super Simple Start to ES Modules in Node.js." And so our homework for you is to follow along with one of those blog posts. Mostly we were focused on Node in this episode, and so I think I'd recommend trying that out for Node, and just to give yourself some exposure to that and explore the idea of moving to native ESM for your stuff. Anything to add with that, Titus?
No, yeah, and like I'm not 100% when this episode will air, so I just hope like the tools will be more ready then, and yeah, I hope this episode also ages well. Like maybe it's just everything went perfect and like we're there already. We'll see.
It'll be a fun one for the history books anyway.
Yeah.
So cool. Hey, thank you, Titus. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. What's remind us again the best place to get in touch with you?
At WOOORM. So that's worm triple O on GitHub or Twitter. If you don't like my tweets, that's fine. Yeah, there. Thanks for
Cool.
having me.
Yeah, thank you. We'll see you all later.